going to make a version of a baked chicken with tomatoes and olives and capers recipe that's already on my site. I noticed that cherry tomatoes were coming into the farmer's market, so I thought it would be a great idea to not only demo this recipe in a video, but also show a different variation of it with cherry tomatoes instead of the jarred tomatoes. So let's first get started on how to actually prep your chicken before you use it. You can see that I'm using some bone-in, skin-on chicken breasts and drumsticks today. You can feel free to really use whatever your preference is for parts. I mean, it's actually quite economical to get an entire chicken from the butcher and have him or her cut it up for you into pieces. I personally prefer using bone-in, skin-on pieces because I feel like they are a little tastier and they stay a little moister, but you can definitely look on my site for a variation on this recipe using boneless, skinless if you just don't have the time to cook with bone and skin on. But what's very important with bone and skin on pieces is that you do have to season those pieces well ahead of time. Otherwise, they just don't taste flavorful through and through. So what I like to do is as soon as I get home from the supermarket, I unwrap the chicken and I sprinkle a bit of kosher salt on all of the pieces on the front side and the back side. So you just take your kosher salt and you sprinkle it like this. And what this does is it really allows the salt to permeate deep inside the chicken meat, as opposed to like if you just sprinkled it on top right before you start cooking with it, you're really not doing very much. So not only is this going to be more flavorful, because the salt is going to season the meat inside, but it also is going to hold on to moisture, so it stays a little bit more juicy. So flip your pieces over like this and sprinkle some more salt on. And then what you're going to do is wrap this back up in the paper that it came in from the supermarket, or you can just leave it on a sheet pan like this and cover it and then just put it in the refrigerator until you're ready to work with it. And you can do this up to 2 days in advance if you want to. So if you don't have time to do this, like if you get home from the market at 4 o'clock and you want to eat dinner at 6 o'clock, you're not going to do this. What you're going to do is maybe something like a wet brine. So you're going to soak your chicken in a saltwater solution for like 45 minutes. And you can find that procedure on my website as well. So for now, we're going to pretend that we're going to put this in the refrigerator and we're going to take it out like the next day. Okay, so now we're taking out the next day. If it looks wet to you, then just pat it dry with a paper towel, but you should not be able to see any visible residue of salt. Okay, but don't rinse it off because you still want it to have that like flavor. Then what you're going to do is you're going to season it with some black pepper. Okay, so just whatever amount you think looks right to you. I'm not a huge pepper fan, so I don't generally put too much on, but you do want to season it with a little bit. And then I have a skillet pan ready to go here. I'm going to start warming it up probably around medium-low up to medium, and we're going to first start this recipe by browning the chicken. The reason we want to do that is because we want to create some flavor. We could probably just throw this into the oven with a little olive oil and salt and pepper and it would be okay, it would be fine, but we want it to be great. So the way we're going to get it to be great is by browning the chicken ahead of time first. So you're going to take your pieces of chicken, and I just have some all-purpose flour here. Generally, I never use all-purpose flour for anything because it's just not that nutritive, it's super processed, but we're just dredging chicken in it, so who cares? It's going to be really a lot more fine than if you use like a whole wheat flour. But feel free, if you're gluten intolerant, you can use a gluten-free flour blend or something like a rice flour. Just keep in mind those flours will be a little bit more gritty, have a little bit more texture than something like a white flour. But what this is going to do is it just helps to give a nice tender coating on the chicken, and it helps to thicken the sauce later. So I like to do this, but feel free to skip this if you don't do grains or anything like that, and no need to adjust the rest of the recipe. So you can see I'm just kind of coating this lightly with flour, and then right before I put it back on our sheet pan, I give it like a little shake just to get off some of the excess flour. There's no need to make this, you know, a super starchy sauce or anything. So you're just going to toss to coat, and then you can do this in a Ziploc bag too, but otherwise this is pretty easy. So just like that. Okay. Let me wash my hands and I'll come back, and then we're going to start browning our chicken. Now we're going to start browning our chicken, and I'm going to put the chicken skin side down to start with. And I know that this isn't the most helpful way to cook chicken, but really the most helpful way to cook chicken is with steam or condensation or poaching, and that's not always the most flavorful. So I don't know, I feel like we have to mix it up a little bit. So we're going to just add this last piece, and I can definitely get these little drumsticks in here, no problem. So just squeeze them in just like that. And I'm going to leave this pan here. The reason for that is because we want to remove the chicken after it's been browned on both sides, and we're going to have to put it someplace. And so this is a perfect vehicle to do that because it has a rim, which means that once the chicken is resting and some juices may start to release from the chicken, you don't want it to like spill all over the place. So this is a great pan to catch those juices. You are not cooking the chicken through at this point, okay? You are just browning it. You're just creating flavor. If you tried to cook the chicken through on the pan right now, you'd end up drying it out because it still has to get baked in the oven. So don't even attempt to cook it through. And the reason it's okay to put this back on this pan that had the raw chicken is because, again, it still has to be baked again. So don't worry about any bacterial contamination. Okay, so we're going to let this sit here until it's golden brown on one side, and then we'll flip it over. If you try and flip it over too early, you know, and it's like sticking a little bit, it's not ready. Just wait for the chicken to release by when you kind of put your tongs under there. If it releases easily and it's nice and golden, then you're good to go. If it's kind of staying put and sticking, then you just need to wait a few minutes, okay? So once this is golden brown, I'll flip it over on the other side. Okay, let's take a peek at this chicken. It's been on here for about 4 or 5 minutes. That looks nice and golden brown. So just turn these pieces over, and then you'll get a little color on the other side, okay? Just like that. Same thing with your drumsticks. Okay, now after a couple more minutes, we're going to remove the chicken, put it in this pan to rest, and then we're going to start by sauteing some onion wedges. And it's kind of like similar to most braise recipes. Not that this is going to be a full braise because we're only covering it for part of the time, but typically this is how you start it. You take your meat or your chicken and then you brown it first, you remove it, and then you start by sauteing some aromatic vegetables. We're going to then deglaze the pan. We're going to put the chicken back in, and that's kind of how they all go. So once you know that general formula, then you can start adapting different flavors and changing it up a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to take the chicken off the pan now and let it sit here to rest. And you're going to take a peek inside the pan. If it looks super oily, you may want to remove some of that grease. If it doesn't, like this probably only has about a tablespoon in there, I think it's probably enough to get my onions started. Then we are going to just leave it as is. So I have here some onion wedges, and I'm going to take these onions and I'm going to put them in the pan. And we're just going to get them to be a little bit translucent, kind of soften them up a little bit, just kind of coax some of their flavor out. And we are going to wait to put our garlic in, okay? The reason for that is because there's just so much room still in the pan, so that if you put your garlic in there right now, it would for sure burn before the onions were tender and translucent. That's generally when how I decide if I'm going to put my garlic in with my onions. Is there a lot of room in the pan? Well, no. So then the garlic is going to have too much space and it'll burn. But if you're doing like a whole, stock pot with lots of vegetables for a soup, and you can definitely throw your garlic in at the same time because it's like there's no way that it would burn. Okay, set this over here. And you're just going to saute the onions just like this. If they break up a little bit, no problem. And by all means, if you would rather have thinly sliced onions, then go right ahead and thinly slice your onions. I kind of like the way the wedges look, and I think it's just so substantial to eat them that way. So that's just my opinion. And we're going to take some salt and just season them up right now, like that. If you wanted to add some pepper, you could. If you wanted to add some crushed red pepper and make this a little on the hot side, definitely go right ahead. Add a 1/4 teaspoon or a 1/2 teaspoon, and you would add it when you add the garlic, but it was kind of be at this point. So when these are nice and tender, then I'll add the garlic. Okay, these onions are starting to look great. Let me show you a couple. So they have some nice golden color on them. They've softened up a little bit, so it's a good time to add our garlic. And the garlic just needs like 30 seconds, 60 seconds tops, okay? Otherwise, again, you will burn it. So just toss that around in there. And then our next step here is going to be to deglaze the pan. So any brown bits that have formed on the bottom of your pan, those are concentrated bits of flavor. We definitely want to pull them off the pan and then back into the sauce. And the technique for doing that is called deglazing. And we're going to do that with some sort of an acid. I usually use like a white wine, and that's what we're going to use today. Also, this recipe calls for tomatoes. That's an acidic food, so that will help to deglaze the pan as well. So either way, that's what you're trying to do. And my favorite tool for doing that is with a wooden spatula. If you use stainless steel to try and scrape the bottom of the pan, you're just going to scratch it. And I don't really like using plastic utensils in heat because they can leach. So get something like this. This is actually better than even a wooden spoon because it has a bigger surface here to kind of really scrape. So at this point, I'm going to use some cherry tomatoes. So we're going to stick these in here, like that, and start to saute those a little bit. And then we are going to add in our wine. You can use anything you want that's dry. Dry meaning that it's not sweet. So this is a very basic Chardonnay that I picked up at Whole Foods. It's fine. Okay, whatever you have, I'm sure it's fine. As long as it's like drinkable, then it's good enough. You don't have to get anything fancy. So the other thing that you can do is sometimes I get these 4-packs of wine bottles from either Ralph's or Target. Go for the glass ones though, I'm not really into plastic. And these are great for a recipe like this where you just don't need that much. So I keep these little 4-packs in my pantry. Okay, so start adding our wine. Add it carefully because you have an open flame here. And then I'm also going to add a little bit of homemade chicken stock. If you don't have just this little bit of chicken stock on hand, don't worry, just add more wine. I'm sure you could even get away with water if you wanted to. It's not that much, but I happen to have some. So we're going to pour that in there. And then again, just take the edge of your spatula or whatever utensil you're using and just start to scrape the bottom, okay? So any little brown bits that have formed on the bottom, we're basically cleaning them off and incorporating them back into the sauce, okay? So, just like that. And then once this comes to a simmer, we're going to add in some other great flavors. Now, instead of using thyme, which is in the recipe on my site, because I'm using the cherry tomatoes and basil is coming into season, I thought it'd be fun to add some basil. So I just have a couple of big leaves and we'll just tear these up like this and then incorporate this into our mixture. Because cherry tomatoes and basil go like this together. And then I'm also going to add some capers because I love them. Okay, so just drain all the brine out. And then I'm using some Kalamata olives. These are already pitted. Just get whatever you can get that's already pitted because pitting olives is super annoying. So if you find some green olives that you love and they're already pitted, get them. Otherwise, whatever you can find that's already pitted. If you hate olives, go on my site. I give you some alternative flavors and ingredients for this recipe, but I love olives. Okay, so get all of that nice flavor incorporated. Toss this all together. It smells amazing. And that's basically it. So we're going to add the chicken back in, kind of nestle these pieces like so. And we're going to make sure that our liquid that's in here is simmering, okay? So it's kind of, gently boiling. And then we're going to cover this just for 15 minutes when we're in the oven. And then we're going to take off the cover and let it cook just for an additional approximately like 30-ish minutes in the oven, okay? So this looks good to me. We're going to turn it off the heat, put our cover on, and we're going to pop it in the oven. Looks good. You can smell this. It smells so good. All right. Chicken is done. It looks beautiful. And we are going to let this rest for probably 10 or 15 minutes, even 20, before we carve up the breast. I mean, obviously you could serve it this way too, but it is gorgeous and ready to eat. Okay, we're back and it's time to present our chicken. So I'm going to just take some of this parsley and just chop it up for garnish. This is optional, but I always think it makes things look a lot prettier. So we'll just get this diced up and kind of push it off to the side for now. And don't forget, you can actually save these stems for juicing, or you can put them in the freezer, and next time you make chicken stock or veggie stock, you can just throw these into the pot. So I'll save those. Now for the chicken, I've let this sit for a bit, so it's not terribly, terribly hot. But whenever I serve bone-in skin-on chicken breast, I do like to remove the bones before I serve it. I think it just makes it much more manageable to eat, and it's a lot more elegant. If this were super, super hot, you can just put on some gloves if you wanted to carve it. So I flip the chicken over, and then I kind of dig my fingers underneath this bone that's more towards the fleshy part of the meat, and I just get my fingers in there and kind of pull everything out. So you really are left with very little meat on the bone, as opposed to if you were carving it with a knife, sometimes a lot of meat gets stuck on there. So just pull off anything that you wouldn't want to eat. Sometimes at the top there's that little half wishbone, and I kind of yank that out right there, and then just carve on the diagonal like that. Get a nice sharp knife so that you can cut through the skin. If your knife is not sharp, then you might struggle with this step. Okay, and then I kind of pull that whole piece of chicken and then put it back into my platter or my skillet. If you don't have a skillet that you would like to present in, then you can just transfer this to a platter and pour all of those juices right on top. But just pull this out like this. I'm kind of like a brute when I do this, but it's really the best way. And then again, that little wishbone at the top. And then slice. I'm going to leave the drumsticks on the bone, obviously, and you could do the same for the thighs. But the breast meat I do like to carve up, because I also feel like most people don't eat an entire chicken breast these days. So you may want to just be able to give people the amount of chicken that they want to have. Okay, so again, just kind of rip this out of here, like so. And then if there's that little piece, that bone on the top, you can pull that out as well. Okay, last piece. And then we'll just garnish with parsley. Chives work too. And then you're ready to serve. See how much prettier that looks just with that little bit of green? Okay. And there you have it.